As a young Matt Barrows, did you ever watch the TV show The Beverly Hillbillies?
It was a little before my time, and for some reason, my mom didn't think that was appropriate for us to watch. So I knew that it existed, but I never. I don't think I've ever watched an episode from start to finish.
Well, I bring it up because in the beginning of that, they showed that the Beverly Hillbillies were hillbillies that struck oil, and then because they struck oil, they moved to Beverly Hills. And that was kind of the premise for the show. And I bring it up because I haven't heard struck oil in a while until Julian Edelman, the former Patriots wide receiver, went on Colin Cowherd's show. And this is what he said about Brock Purdy. He says, you have to be, when he was asked, his take on Purdy, he was probably asked if he was impressed. He says, you have to be. They struck oil with the late round pick, Mr. Irrelevant. When you watch Brock Purdy play, he processes the game. You never see him double pump or on something, double clutch. He knows where he's going with the ball, and that's a testament to Kyle Shanahan knowing what he likes as a play caller, what makes Brock comfortable, and also Brock going out and executing. Like, I went out and watched these guys in preseason, and I was a little concerned with his arm strength because he just had the UCL. He was barely getting it out there. And what does Kyle Shanahan do? He gives him plays and throws that he knows he can make. And right now, because of the talent they have, he doesn't have to play outside of his game. He just has to deliver the football. So, did the Niners strike oil with Brock Purdy? And I guess maybe the bigger question with this comment is, do you think that Kyle is kind of coaching around, a quarterback that he really likes and that really processes, but doesn't have, he makes it sound like he maybe doesn't even have requisite arm strength.
Well, first of all, if you're going to do a strike oil analogy, what about There Will Be Blood? That's a little bit more recent than the Beverly Hillbillies.
That's true.
I definitely saw that with Daniel Day-Lewis. Some fantastic scenes in that movie. Yeah, well, the answer is yes. They did strike oil with him, and if Shanahan is coaching around Brock Purdy's weaknesses, and I think probably every coach quarterback has that dynamic to some degree. I would think that if they were significant, these defenses would have, caught up to it by now. That Wink Martindale, for example, would have, figured out something that really flummoxed Brock Purdy. And he did. I think early on, Purdy was definitely off his game. He was inaccurate, throwing behind receivers. I mean, we all saw the plays where George Kittle and Deebo Samuel had to break up throw. I think there were 3 of those really on that opening drive. But beyond that, it was good. And, he won deep a couple of times. There's a question about whether the back shoulder throw to Deebo was meant to be a back shoulder throw, or whether that throw should be properly thrown into the, far corner of the end zone. I mean, potato sometimes. I mean, it worked out really well. He put it in a spot where Deebo Samuel had a great shot at getting it, et cetera. So I think it's a good question as far as the deep ball. I mean, it's entirely possible that Brock Purdy's gotten away with some of those this year. Some that are deep shoulder throws maybe weren't meant to be, or back shoulder throws maybe weren't meant to be back shoulder throws. But he did well at that last year. I mean, that's sort of like the first thing a defensive coordinator is going to attack with a young, unproven quarterback. They're going to make you beat them over the top. They're going to stuff that box, shut down the run, shut down the easy passes, and make the passes difficult. And that's something that Purdy did time and again, right off the bat, really, against Miami and certainly against the Buccaneers, those first 2 prominent games for him. So I guess the question is whether with his strange offseason that deep ball is back to where he wants it to be at this point. And really, it's hard to say what the answer is. Didn't look great against the Rams. He did strike against the the Giants the other night, but it's quite possible that some of those throws were not exactly what he intended them to be.
It's funny what I didn't I wasn't on Twitter during the game because I just can't be. I mean, I just can't go into the Twitter and the game. It's like I've got to be all in on the game or all in on Twitter, and I can't go all in on Twitter during the game. But after the game, when I went back and kind of scrolled through, there were people losing their mind with negativity on Brock
On
Purdy in the
Twitter?
first.
Huh.
Yeah,
That doesn't sound right.
it doesn't sound right at all. Must have just been a weird day. I caught it on the wrong day. But yeah, I mean, there was so much negativity about Purdy and how he played against the Giants. And there were people that were just ready to, this is awful, and this throws bad, and that throws bad. And, he did throw a ball to Kittle that Kittle had to like bat down, almost act like a defensive back. He threw a ball to Debo that kind of hung and was definitely kind of soft and could have gone any direction, and Debo kind of knocked it down. So there were a couple of less than stellar throws for sure. But when you factor in the blitzes, the array of blitzes and the exotic blitzes that Martindale, the defensive coordinator for the G-Men, brought in that game, I kind of look at that, as a huge hurdle game for Brock Purdy, in that if you're going to bring that level, that many blitzes and that many different blitzes at a second-year quarterback, and he's not going to get flummoxed. He's not going to start to look nervous. He's not going to turn the ball over. In some ways, I almost feel like that was one of Brock's better games because he passed a test there. How do you evaluate Brock last in the game against the G-Men?
I think I'm like a lot of people where I initially thought that that wasn't his best game. And in fact, it was probably one of his worst games. That was my thought coming out of the game. And by the way, it's a high bar. I mean, we're talking his worst game is a passer rating in the mid 90s.
Right.
So when I say it was, I thought my initial reaction was it was one of his worst games. Most of his games were stellar. So I knew that it was still a very good game, obviously, from the the final result and everything. But I think it was a game, and Kyle Shanahan noted this too, where after you study it, you appreciate it more for all the reasons you just mentioned. All the blitzes and the fact that he went to the right spots, not a lot of options sometimes. So it looked ugly. I mean, it looked like, they're just sort of piecemealing their way through the night with lots of screens, lots of quick slants, whatnot. But I mean, that's what was being offered to them. And I saw you talking to Sam Darnold today. I grabbed him too, and I asked him about Purdy's performance. And he agreed with Shanahan. It was something when they looked on film and they saw just how complicated those blitzes were and how they were different every time. It wasn't like Martindale was bringing the same thing. He was bringing something different each time, and being able to handle that on a short week. I think that impressed Sam Darnold, the guy who's gone against Wink Martindale a couple of times, to a great extent. And so I think it was a performance that you appreciate more and more the more that you think about it, and the more that you kind of study what happened.
I enjoyed talking to Darnold, by the way. This was the first one-on-one interview that I've done with him, but I've enjoyed his trips to the podium. You give him a thoughtful question, he gives you a thoughtful answer. He doesn't sit there and try to, give you some generic answer or, speak in generalities, or he really thinks about the question and gives you an answer. Not everybody does that, and I kind of respect that, and especially when it's somebody else's show. He's on the team, of course, but we're asking him a lot of times about another quarterback who's playing instead of him, and some guys may bristle at that. He doesn't. There's a level of mental maturity that comes with Sam Darnold that I really appreciate, and I don't know. I found him really interesting. I'm going to play some of that interview Sunday on the pregame show on 95.7 The Game with Lo Neal, but I really enjoy talking to Sam Darnold. What's your assessment of him when you get a chance to? Because you're like me, you go in the locker room and I get the feeling almost like there's only a very few people that kind of go and do one-on-one conversations. there's an awful lot of people in the locker room, but it seems like the favorite pastime for many of the media, and I'm not judging it, I'm just observing it, is to like, let's stand in a group and all ask one question. I kind of like to go up to somebody who's not being inundated and ask 7 questions. I don't know. Do you have a philosophy about that? But give me your thoughts on Darnold.
Yeah, I bumped into Alex Smith in the airport this summer. I think it was after the Raiders preseason a game there, and he was talking about how I brought it up. I said, Trey Lance was still on the roster at this point. I said, I see a lot of you and Trey Lance as far as your stories, and he agreed with that, and he said Sam Darnold as well. And, Sam Darnold drafted very highly, disappointment with his first team, has been around the league a bit. I mean, to me, it just kind of provides him with experience so he can, really answer a question about what it's like to go up against a Wink Martindale defense. And then, perspective. He's seen it from all angles. He's been a backup. He's been the starter, etc. So I mean, it just guys who have been up and down like that. I feel like they've got more to say just because they've had a greater diversity of experiences. So yeah, I agree with you. To me, he's been a lot better one-on-one than he's been up on the podium, and that might be a backup quarterback thing where it is somebody else's show. You don't want to say too much. You don't want to reveal too much, but yeah, he was good today. He was one of the few people in the locker room speaking today, so he had to be good. But yeah, I mean, as far as your other comment,
Yeah.
that's a thing. Back when I was writing for the newspaper and I had to get every piece of news into the story, it's necessary sometimes to kind of be part of those things because you need to know how Brandon Ayuk's shoulder is feeling. Was he able to catch the ball today? But in this day and age where it's more sort of specialized stuff, you don't have to be as general. You don't have to have that big notebook that's got, dot, items. You can be more selective about who you talk to.